How did Israel win the Six-Day War? The thrice-holy city of Jerusalem carries within it a heavy destiny. Scene of bloody wars and sieges throughout the ages, it could have sunk into oblivion, reduced to a pile of anonymous stones. Yet an extraordinary promise keeps it at the center of history. A promise made 2,500 years ago, when the Jewish people lay in exile, deprived of their land and spiritual capital. The prophets announced its miraculous return. A day would come when the exiles would retake possession of Zion. And that day came, against all odds, in June 1967 during the Six-Day War. The Israeli army, vastly outnumbered, won a lightning victory and unified the Holy City under Jewish control for the first time in 2,000 years. But the prophetic story does not end there. Strange predictions evoke a darker future, where Jerusalem would fall again, half into the hands of a foreign power. Its Jewish inhabitants would be exiled, while a charismatic political leader would impose himself as a deceitful mediator, breaking a pact that would plunge the region into chaos, and extraordinary celestial signs would accompany these apocalyptic events. Myth or reality? Empty dreams or truthful vision of a distant future? If Jerusalem could speak, its millennia-old ramparts would undoubtedly tell us the rest of the story. A sequel engraved in its stones since the foundations of the world, and whose outcome is perhaps approaching swiftly. Let us delve back into this Six-Day War. In just 6 days, the State of Israel shocked the world by fighting against 5 surrounding nations, not only to defeat its enemy, but also to establish its grip over the entire region. From June 5th, 10th, 1967, Israel fought against the neighboring and regional nations of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon, in what became a decisive turning point for the newly formed nation. What ensued seemed like a miracle, with events decisively turning in favor of tiny Israel. In the weeks leading up to the outbreak of war, the mood among Israelis was bleak, and, in the words of photographer David Rubinger, a witness to the conflict,
in the weeks preceding the war, a mood of gloom prevailed. The National Stadium was prepared to receive 40,000 graves, and even though we thought we would win, victory would be costly.
The Israelis were vastly outnumbered and less well-armed than the Arab nations, which had over 500,000 soldiers, nearly 1,000 fighter jets, and over 2,500 tanks, compared to the Israeli military, which had only 300 aircraft, 800 tanks, and 250,000 soldiers. However, the Israel Defense Forces made monumental preparations. Military procedures were honed, and calculations were made years in advance to determine how many fighter jets Israel could have in the air at any given time. The process of landing, refueling, rearming, and getting back into the air was minimized. The Israeli Air Force could turn around a fighter jet in 8 minutes and accomplish this for its entire fleet up to 8 times a day. Events kicked off with Operation Focus, a preemptive strike by the Israeli Air Force, which bombed Egyptian air bases. Egypt transmitted false information to surrounding Arab nations, claiming to have won the conflict, which widened the conflict to neighboring countries. This led Syria, Jordan, and Iraq to launch strikes against Israel. Israel's preparations paid off, and by the end of the first day of conflict, Israel had gained air superiority. Over the next 5 days, the IDF went on the offensive on 3 fronts, advancing into the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. Arab losses were extremely heavy, and extreme for such a short period. Over 20,000 Arab soldiers were killed or missing, compared to less than 1,000 Israeli soldiers. Several reports from the conflict related that Arab civilians and local militias mistook the Israeli forces for those from Iraq. Colonel Uri Benari recounted this episode when they captured the West Bank town of Nablus. At the entrance to the city of Nablus stood thousands of Arabs waving white handkerchiefs and applauding vigorously. In our naivety, we returned their greetings and smiles. We entered the city and our surprise was great. We were advancing and there was no disorder, no panic. The local armed guards were standing, rifles in hand, to maintain order while the crowds cheered. I did not understand what had happened. It was only later that I understood. The inhabitants of Nablus thought we were the Iraqi forces that were supposed to arrive from Jordan. Other eyewitnesses report panicked Syrian soldiers who were paralyzed and unable to retaliate, dude shells landing on a munitions vehicle, and the inexplicable lack of response from Egyptian and other Arab forces when fighting first broke out. In just 6 days, Israel won victory against impossible odds and tripled the size of land under Israeli control, including the religious sites of East Jerusalem. According to biblical prophecies, the Jews, who were largely driven out of the land of Israel for the past 2 millennia, would once again inhabit Jerusalem. The verses predicting this were written about 2,500 years ago. Yet here we are today with a bitter Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which, before these mid-20th century events, would have been unbelievable. If a 2,500-year-old text was able to accurately predict who would control Jerusalem, perhaps we should also consider what that text declares. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses a refold, and the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Zechariah 14:2. With a current population of about 900,000, the Jewish population of Jerusalem, according to the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics, barely exceeds 500,000. What half of the city will be taken into captivity and what other events will occur at that time? According to some interpretations of biblical prophecies, the eastern half of Jerusalem, comprising the Old City and Temple Mount, could fall into the hands of a foreign power in a future conflict involving Israel and its neighbors. This part of the city, so symbolic in Jewish and Christian history, would then be taken into captivity and its access forbidden to Jews. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. Zechariah 12:2. Among the events that could occur at this troubled time, some evoke the advent of a charismatic political leader who would impose himself as a mediator in the Middle East. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty, and also the holy people. Daniel 23:25. Some see in him the figure of the Antichrist mentioned in Scripture, who would confirm a 7-year covenant with Israel before brutally breaking this pact. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years. Daniel 9:27. An invasion of Israel by hostile neighboring nations would then follow. You will ascend, coming like a storm, covering the land like a cloud, you and all your troops and many peoples with you. Ezekiel 38:9. Other mysterious biblical passages allude to extraordinary cosmic and celestial phenomena accompanying these events: darkening of sun and moon, stars falling from heaven, etc. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Matthew 24:29. What is it about? Are these symbolic visions or literal descriptions? Only time will tell. In any case, the status of Jerusalem remains at the heart of many prophecies, whose ultimate outcome remains uncertain. Prudence and careful study of Scripture remains necessary. Thus, Jerusalem remains at the heart of Scripture as the symbolic epicenter of the outcome of human history. City of great discord before becoming city of great peace. Engraved in its stones are the stigmata of this spiritual struggle working within humanity. For the Christian, the true rest promised to Zion lies in the biblical New Jerusalem, the one which will descend from heaven adorned as a bride, where God will wipe away every tear and death will be no more. But before the dawn of this glorious day looms the dark night of the distress foretold, the ultimate exile of the holy people and the captivity of an earthly Jerusalem trampled underfoot by nations. The warning signs are already evident here and there, inviting the believer to vigilance. For the Prince of Peace himself warns that when we see the abomination of desolation set up in the holy place, then the death knell will have tolled for the thrice-holy city. The hour of flight will have arrived, in waiting for his return on the clouds. Thus, the Church scrutinizes the prophetic announcements concerning Jerusalem, keeping vigil in prayer over the warning signs of the return of her Lord. Guardian of the mystery at the heart of this sign city, she reads in it both the shadow that comes and the eternal light that will dawn for the redeemed of the Almighty.